Tuesday, this day at the Northern Real Farming Conference. What an amazing conference it's being. So we're here, we've got an hour and a half to talk about our FarmStart project. I'm one of the coordinators of the Urban Agriculture Consortium, along with Jeremy, who's also here. And we've been working with 5 cities around a number of different themes, one of which is FarmStarts. There's a shared kind of interest in and need in setting up FarmStarts in more and more cities. So yeah, we've got a slideshow, and we're going to go to first of all to Hattie, and then back to me, and then to Fran and Bethan, who will be doing in-depth looks at where they've got to in Nottingham and Sheffield. I also just want to welcome Catherine and Sonia, who are coordinating the FarmStart work in Middlesbrough and Leeds, and also Ellen, of course, who's leading the way for us in Lancaster. So without further ado, I'll pass to Hattie, who is the FarmStart Network Coordinator at the Landworkers Alliance, who the Urban Ag Consortium is partnering with to deliver this project, with the help of Necessity, who've funded it through this year. Over to you, Hattie.
Thanks very much, Maddie. Really pleased to be here today, everyone. Yeah, like Maddie said, I started quite recently as the FarmStart Network Coordinator. It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you about that today. So we thought, yeah, it'd be a good idea just to go into the sort of background of the network itself and the context of why we think it's so necessary. So do you want to give me the first slide, please, Maddie? So yeah, why do we need FarmStarts? What is the current situation that dictates that they're so important? I'm sure many of you know a lot of these things, but at the moment we've got a really aging population of farmers. A third of all holders are over 65, and quite worryingly, for the proportion of under 35s is something around 3%. So we obviously need more farmers, and younger preferably. We're also faced with the problem that farming is the least diverse occupation in the UK. So, I mean, it's astonishing, really. 98.6% of farmers are white British, and 83 to 84% of those are male. And the kind of backdrop to that is just many issues which we're all really familiar with around food security, biodiversity, and the climate crisis. So we know that there's a real need for innovative approaches to food provision and farming, but currently new entrants or potential new entrants are facing a number of different barriers. What we found is that there are huge numbers of people wanting to access farming, but for instance, the startup costs are incredibly high. So you're talking between 50 to 200,000 K. And because there are low margins and high risk, it makes it hard to get loans. And if you can get them, they are unaffordable. So yeah, in the last 20 years, farmers who want to start up on an ownership basis have seen costs increase by around 600%. So it's a tough climate in terms of startup costs. Coupled with that, it's difficult to access land. We've got massively inflated land prices, and it's very hard to get secure tenure. What we've seen is a consolidation of land and a loss of farming infrastructure, making it hard for people to enter. So, for instance, in 2017, 40% of farm purchases weren't made by farmers. So, and you can be sure that, only 40% of them were made by farmers, and you can be sure that a very small percentage of them were new entrants. On top of that, training is also lacking. There's just a lack of appropriate training within technological approaches to farming. So it's very hard to go from an allotment grower to a qualified farmer. It's just not a straightforward environment. I think we'll probably hear a bit more about that later. So we did a survey recently, and 56% of new entrants we asked cited training as a barrier. And although 74% of those people were actually educated to degree level, only 20 to 21% had relevant agricultural training. So you're looking at a picture where there's sort of overqualified but underqualified new entrants who are sort of really wanting to get that experience but not finding it anywhere. And there's also the issue of routes to market. So we all know the food system is pretty skewed, but once you've put all that effort into finding land and getting training and etc., how do you actually sell your produce? That's a barrier. So the idea of FarmStarts is to take away some of this risk for new entrants and provide protected access to some of these things that we've just been talking about. Next slide, please, Maddie. And my apologies, everyone, if I sound a bit coldy. I'm recovering from one. So yeah, what is a FarmStart? In their essence, they are projects which support access to various things. The most important or kind of core aspects of them being training or mentoring, land, and routes to market. So they may also provide business support in some form, equipment and infrastructure, a means of progression onto land for these new entrants once they've sort of completed their farm start, as it were, and perhaps even a community of other farm starters or producers, ideally. So there's this networking and a sense of community. So yeah, they're set up as an opportunity for new entrants to test out their farming and growing ideas in this protective environment, whilst enabling them to build their knowledge, skills and confidence so that they can progress with their own business. So they're normally centrally managed by a group or organisation, and by providing these different elements, it just allows people to trial their business, to get a deeper understanding of what it actually means to be a grower or a farmer, without sort of suffering from all the barriers that we just discussed earlier. So yeah, there are various ways of doing it, and it looks a bit different depending on the kind of opportunities or challenges within specific regions. But there are a couple of core, so they're always agroecologically managed or organically certified. They always provide access to markets and this kind of supportive framework. And they really fill a gap, basically, in the current opportunity for new entrants. At the moment, we've sort of got traineeships and a kind of can be a bit of an abyss for new entrants. And so this really, the FarmStart and the organisations that run them are trying to tackle this. Next slide, please, Maddie. So yeah, I thought just a little look at what we mean by the FarmStart network, what it is. So the first FarmStart was started in the UK by Kindling Trust in 2013. They've sort of been quite involved actually with this Northern Pathfinder thing. Unfortunately couldn't attend today, but they were really kind of key to starting the whole thing off. Very quickly followed by Tamar Grow Local and Organically. Again, I think we'll hear more about them later. And they kind of, they got together with Landworkers Alliance to try and fulfill the need there was for joined up working and collaboration in this sector, to share knowledge, to share skills, to share learning experiences. And yeah, with the ultimate aim to just share knowledge and learning and to facilitate the development of more sites around England, the UK, sorry. So currently there's only, well, I say only because we lost a few, but there's 5 operational sites. We lost a few last year to things like land being sold and a lack of resource and time, which is a shame. But the good news is there's several exciting ones in the pipeline, which some of a few of which we'll hear about later. But you see the spreads kind of, it's a fairly good spread over the country, and they vary hugely between sites. At any one time, at the moment, there's around 30 farm starters on these sites, working on plots from as small as 100 meters squared to shared access to a 500 hectare farm. So it's huge flex in size. It's not always useful to give an average size. But a lot of horticultural units starts at about a quarter of an acre and then move to bigger plots as they grow in confidence or if the land is available. At the moment, they're all horticulture based, but there have been examples in the past of pigs, sheep, goat enterprises. It's not that FarmStarts are exclusively need to be about horticulture. And, in the future, we're hoping to work with more organisations that will diversify the enterprises on FarmStarts. So within these different sites, tenure ranges from a couple of years to indefinite, where sites have enough land. New entrants are generally self-employed, but sites are providing, all these subsidised ways of subsidising their costs, so like equipment, training, and etc., as we just discussed. So that's a real kind of brief overview of what's going on, trying to sort of collate what is actually a very varied set of different projects. I think that's one of the beauties of FarmStarts. They can vary hugely depending on what the kind of need is within the area and what the skills are within the organisation. Next slide, please, Maddie. So yeah, it's worth mentioning, and this is all kind of ties back to the original kind of more structural barriers that we looked at. Why is it, why aren't there more FarmStarts in the UK at the moment? What's the challenges? Their financial resource is needed. We looking at this kind of the way FarmStarts, the FarmStart model, it will always need to be subsidised by grant funding, and we don't think that's a bad thing, particularly. In the UK, most places do charge, but the actual cost is a lot higher. Ongoing running costs vary a lot, but they're somewhere between 15,000 and 30,000 a year, and that money needs to come from somewhere. Obviously, there's some income gained through selling produce, but yeah, on top of that, it needs to be subsidised elsewhere. Most FarmStarts are embedded in a larger project, which does help, but funding can be an issue. We touched upon training earlier. This comes up fairly often. How do you provide training within your organisation? Who's going to deliver it, and how do you pay for it? The support or level of support can sometimes be an issue or a barrier. How much are you able to give to farm starters? Can you set up a sort of infrastructure of support around them to make them feel like they're really part of a supported, structured environment? Again, that the level of support can vary hugely between different FarmStart sites, but there needs to be those basic kind of support structures, and that can sometimes be a push for FarmStart sites who are hosting them. I'm sure we'll begin to look a little bit more at some of the barriers faced in specific sites a bit later, but those are some of the common ones. Next slide, please, Maddie. Thanks. So yeah, currently, we know that the model works. We know it's a good one. We know there's several, we've briefly began to look at the organizations that are doing them very successfully. And in France in particular, and in North America, there are, for the FarmStart projects that are flourishing. And that's often to do with the level of support that comes from on a statutory level. So what we're hoping to achieve is government investment into sites. there's currently no financial support available for new entrants in the sector. And we want to see this changing. So government investments into sites, training, and to support farmer income for the first years, which sounds maybe a bit pie in the sky, but that is what happens in France. New entrants get 2 years of financial income support. We'd like to see incentives to local authorities and landowners to make land available, and support for organisations to manage the site, and support to provide tenancies that enable new entrants to become long-term tenants. These are kind of the broad kind of, these are the main areas we asked for support in the DEFRA co-design that we've been part of in the last couple of months. So what we want to do is ensure that support is directed where it's needed most. And so, yeah, we've stressed the importance of FarmStarts and their role in tackling some of the most prevalent issues facing new entrant farmers. So we're not sure exactly what DEFRA will make of our kind of advocation of the FarmStart model and other support for new entrants. But we're encouraged by the fact that they're interested in the model, and you know, fingers crossed there will be funding through the new entrant support scheme. That is the end of my slides. And so I'm going to pass over to Maddie, who's going to chat a little bit more specifically about this collaboration and the Northern Pathfinders. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hattie. That's really great. So that's the kind of the context. And, you know, the Landworkers Alliance have been the key organisation kind of trying to break new ground, as it were, for new entrants, and which is why I wanted the UAC to work in partnership with them on this, of course. So back about a year ago, the Urban Agriculture Consortium started doing some research with these 5 cities, Lancaster, Leeds, Middlesbrough, Nottingham and Sheffield, to find out what things they felt were opportunities, challenges, strengths in their sort of local food sector. The people that we were working with back then are generally the coordinators of the local food partnerships, and the interest in FarmStarts was something that was shared across all of them, and Lancaster is 2 or 3 years ahead, set up theirs, and Ellen did all that work in Lancaster. So that's providing a really important kind of inspiration and guide for the other cities to also follow and learn from in these early stages. So seeing that UAC could help kind of create a project around the FarmStarts, I approached the Landworkers Alliance, and it was before Hattie was the FarmStart coordinator, and we started thinking about how we might collaborate, what a kind of learning journey might be for these cities starting out in their FarmStart journeys. And at the same time, we also we went to Necessity, the funder, and put that to them as a piece of work that there was a clear need for and interest in, and would they be interested in funding that? And they said yes. So that was brilliant. So then we had the means to create and deliver a sort of learning journey, which was in the form of workshops, bringing in a number of the existing FarmStarts that Hattie highlighted, as teachers sharing their experience. And so this was our timeline of the whole project. So you can see it began late 2020, identifying the shared need, setting up the collaboration with LWA and the funding. And then in May, June, July, we ran these 4 workshops. Now this is based on the document created previously by the Landworkers Alliance called How to Set Up a FarmStart. So we followed that that piece of work, broke it down into sections, and brought these people from these successful FarmStarts in under each of those 4 workshop headings, and had it was done online. So, and it was, yeah, absolutely brilliant. We sort of, most of us had never met in person, so we were determined to use some of the money to get together and do a FarmStart visit. So, and on the 1st of September, we went to the Kindling Trust, and Chris hosted us and showed us around and talked through a lot of the way that they work at their Woodbank site. So between then and now, the Pathfinder cities have been doing their sort of feasibility, I suppose. So we created a kind of workbooks that could help them take notes and create a sort of structured kind of the bones of a feasibility study at the beginning, before the workshop started, for them to sort of use as their draft documents, feasibility documents, and then pad out. We also were able to fund everybody involved through that necessity work, fund the trip to the Kindling Trust, and something for each of the Pathfinder places to sort of do this feasibility work, and to pay the trainers and so on. So that was great. On the 6th of December, we will be getting together to share where we've got to, where each of the cities has got to with their feasibility studies, and think about next steps for 2022. So I've put there, hopefully securing loads of money, land, employing project coordinators, developing training, having council and policy support. So these are some of the things that will flow, we're hoping, out of this feasibility stage. So that's it from me. Welcome any questions at all at the end. I'm going to pass on to Fran from Sheffield.
Thanks, Maddie. So yeah, I'm Fran Halsall. I live in Sheffield, and I work with the Chef Food, which is the food partnership for Sheffield. I work as their urban agriculture coordinator. I also work with Regather, which is a trading cooperative that sells veg boxes in the city, but I actually work as their community gardener. I'm also a community gardener on yet another project, which is also related to Chef Food. As part of the partnership, I work for Food Works, which is a food surplus organisation with an interest in growing food. So where am I up to in this research process? I'm about 30 hours in, and so you could say I'm really building my research model at the moment. This is very much based on what Maddie was saying about what we've been doing in the workshops, trying to pick out the key themes, of which I can't talk to you all about today because I've only got 15 minutes or so. So I'm going to pick out the core themes I want to talk to you about today from a Sheffield perspective. That is the demand for local food, land availability in context for the FarmStart in particular, education, skills and training, and collaborative efforts with lots of stakeholders and consultees, and learning from case studies. I'll have a look at that if I have time in relative depth, but we'll see how we go. Next slide, thank you. So the demand for local food, well, it's growing. For those of you who don't know Sheffield very well, it's actually got quite I would say a keen environmental population. We're right next to the Peak District. A lot of people move here, stay here because of the connections with the landscape. So that means there is actually a thriving independent food sector, but it needs to grow. Every city would benefit from growing. Sheffield has a large and growing population, and it's just not receiving enough organic produce at the moment. And we know that independents also want to secure more crops. Regather itself would like to sell far more through its box scheme, which effectively acts as a food hub for all sorts of local produce. But we buy everything that we can from all the local farmers. We're all quite well connected, and there just simply isn't enough of it. So obviously we have a situation, there's far too few local organic farms to supply the market. Regather have done some interesting research recently. It's not been published yet, but the conclusion is, amongst the customers of Regather at least, that local is as important as organic. And we've noted that a lot of food businesses locally do actually sell local produce as one of their core principles, but of course that's not always organic. So there's room for manoeuvre there. And interestingly, quite recently, because there's been an announcement from Sheffield City Council that they're willing to work collaboratively on revision of the food strategy, there's an option to actually maybe talk to anchor institution heads of procurement, so colleges, schools, hospitals, etc., about how we can supply them and secure their food supply chain whilst also building our food production capacity. Interestingly, this has to be put in context with the fact that just in September, very recently, the City Council actually passed a right to food motion, which in itself is a very important news. But specifically for what I'm talking to today, there is an amendment within that which encourages the development of urban agriculture for economic, social and environmental reasons. Next slide, please. So land availability. Yes, as I've already said, there aren't an abundance of large organic farms around Sheffield. There is one near Doncaster, but currently that's kind of outside of our area. There isn't an obvious home to have a FarmStart. A lot of places are already struggling for space already. So it's not completely ruled out, but I don't think there's going to be a rush to host a FarmStart at any of the farms that are already existing. We have, however, found a walled market garden site, and that comes with the benefit of an accredited tutor with many, many years' experience. He's considered one of the best in Sheffield. So if we were to go ahead with siting our FarmStart at this walled garden, what would the implications of that be? Well, it's a small site with limited capacity to move farm starters off small plots onto larger plots. So it might well work as an initial offering, or even perhaps actually the first year of a FarmStart course, but what then? So just this week on Friday, we're actually looking at another farm that might become available for these purposes, but it's important to point out that it's not yet a functioning business. Other public land has been identified, and we've had some reasonably positive conversations with the City Council about land they hold. But again, they're not farms yet. And the message I've got from everyone I've spoke to involved in the FarmStart network is, first you create the farm, then you create the FarmStart. They're two separate endeavours. You can't expect to run a FarmStart where there's not an existing business. So this also requires additional local authority support, because we need to ensure that there is land available as the programme matures and people move from smaller plots onto larger pieces of land. Next slide, please. So in Sheffield, we don't really have a strong market gardening tradition, and I am going to talk mostly about horticulture today, principally because that's the area we feel we can expand into, and that's the existing food hub in the form of Regather. That's what we specialise in. So we don't have an abundance of horticultural workers in the area. We don't have that many farm workers in the area. The farming that does happen on the edges of the city is predominantly livestock farming, which perhaps isn't a surprise considering some of the land is not very good quality, particularly as you're going off into the west in the Peak District. It's a very different story on the east of the city though, but they are in rural locations, and they're possibly not going to come to the city to work. So what this means is the closest a place that you can actually learn how to do a farming course or something very similar is actually 25 miles away from the city. So that really speaks to the need of actually producing something in the city that's appropriate for the large urban population that lives here already. So we've a situation where we've only got up to level 2 horticulture available within the city. And that particular qualification at Sheffield College is actually very much focused on amenity horticulture. There is no module on food production. So in essence, it would be very difficult to take people from having qualified from that background into new entrance roles on farms without having some kind of bridge, which could indeed be the FarmStart. Regather have tried to come up with an innovative way of approaching this problem by setting up an employer skills academy, or we hope to set up an employer skills academy, which will allow students at Sheffield College studying at year 2 probably to actually come to Regather Farm and learn how to get some market gardening skills. And then they will be in a better position to perhaps be recruited to the FarmStart programme. Okay, next please. So we need to draw on our good existing collaborative networks in Sheffield. A lot of the work that's been done so far has been very grassroots led. So I'm trying to involve as many people as possible, which is one of the reasons the designing of the feasibility study is going to take quite a long time, because there's so many different people to talk to and I don't want to leave anyone out. Most importantly, I feel we've got to lead with the people who might actually become future farm starters and future farmers and market gardeners. And that is by talking to members of the public. There has never been a publicly focused survey finding out whether people would be interested in careers as growers or food producers. So I'm working on a demand for land survey, and this will be launched through our increasingly friendly relationship with various local papers. We've managed to contribute regularly to a food feature, which comes out every week in the Sheffield Star, so we'll get good coverage with that. But also importantly, I'll be sharing this survey with the local food producers and their extended networks, because there are, I know people anecdotally who would love to be involved in a FarmStart, and they're all vaguely connected to growing projects, or they've done a little bit of volunteering, or they've done a little bit of paid work. So there's a lot to explore there. Likewise, community growers, of which I consider myself one, focus on talking to allotmenteers and of course home gardeners as well. And we need to consider the existing campaign groups. So broadly speaking, that would divide into those that are advocating for climate justice, better reductions in CO2 locally, more sustainable food generally, also nature and biodiversity, supporting groups, and of course food poverty and food resilience networks too. Okay, next slide please. Further list of consultees and stakeholders. We do need to talk to the farms and farming networks in the area. However, the majority of these are conventional agriculture, so it's going to be interesting talking to them about the value of agroecology. There's some interesting, I'm going to have to be diplomatic how I approach this, let's put it that way. From the City Council and Sheffield City Region, which is now the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority, we do have relatively good contacts with them now. We've had representatives from both talk at the Farming Sheffield's Fringe event, which was hosted in July. So I know that there is support within those organisations to actually push this forward. What that support will look like remains to be seen. And of course, we'll be talking with all the local educational providers. We've got an existing link with Sheffield College, and we work very closely with both Hallam and Sheffield universities. There's a lot of exciting research going on about sustainable agriculture and innovative approaches that are specifically suited to urban environments. So it could be our FarmStart has some of those elements. It could involve, who knows, it could be involving aquaponics and all sorts of technologies that I don't even know exist yet. And also, of course, we need to talk to the retailers, the people who will actually potentially sell this food when there's more available. Find out what they think about it and whether they'd be willing to support us in our bid to actually produce more food and make sure there's an increased route to market for it. Next slide, please. So I'm going to spend this last section looking at case studies. There's a lot of different FarmStarts out there. I was in danger of having way too many case studies, so I've just boiled it down to 5 that I'm taking from today. So there's the Intervale Centre in Vermont, USA, which is actually an incubator rather than what would be described as a FarmStart. The McVean Farm incubator, which is based in Ontario, and this is what came out of the original setup of the Canadian FarmStart network. And of course, there's a Kindling Trust in Manchester, who's already been mentioned. We've heard about Tamar in Devon, and of course, Organically in London too. Next slide, please. So what have I learned about funding? The North American models seem to be quite funding dependent. They were charging for their courses as well, but the issue seems to have come about when the funding was wasn't renewed around about 2016. I think this happened. All these operations stopped providing farm incubation services, so they've turned into networks that connect farmers who are trying to pass land on to new entrants and finding land for new entrants and making those links. So they're no longer providing those models. The only one that seems to have survived after that is the McVean Farm Incubator, which I'll talk more about shortly. The UK models are a mixture of grant funding, paid fees and sales of produce through the existing links to market. And I think this is a good model. And it's important to acknowledge that grant funding is always going to be a part of this. And, you know, as Hattie said, I think it should be, because we're providing a future benefit for society. So why shouldn't it receive grant funding? However, it really is important to acknowledge that, you know, the business aspects of FarmStarts and how they can at least partially support themselves, so they're not, you know, reliant on the whims of various funders. And, you know, this mixed model is more resilient. So yeah, UK examples, you could describe the FarmStart as a part of the portfolio of activities, and those other activities can absorb some of the costs. And the important thing is, the reason to create FarmStarts, reiterating what Hattie said originally, is we need more farmers. We need more farmers to be working agroecologically. So it's okay for FarmStarts to, you know, effectively not be a money generating scheme. That's not what it's about. It's about producing social and economic gains. Next slide, please. So land access, in their basic form, all FarmStarts or farm incubators do facilitate land access. That is their key function. And many offer some more on top of that. I'll look at more of that on another slide. In the UK, the introductory offer tends to be microplots, or up to 1/4 of an acre. This is in contrast perhaps with some of the North American models that I've looked at, where there is more land available. Well, obviously that's relative to the size of the country. So it's typical to start on a very small plot. And in some ways, I think that's fair as well, because particularly depending on what level of competency you are with your growing skills, you may not want a large plot. A large plot may put you off. So there is a progression onto larger sites as you demonstrate your competency. This is very much true of Organically. FarmStarters are very well supported to move their businesses to a new location. And they're helped with this by the fact that new pieces of land are being constantly brought into Organically's domain, so there is land for people to go to. Kindling Trust at Woodbank, this is relevant perhaps because I was talking about the Market Garden site that we found earlier. Kindling Trust at the Woodbank site has minimal room to expand, so that does determine the number of people that can be on the scheme in any 1 year. If they are actually acquiring or have acquired a large field, which is in a peri-urban location, so you could say that the urban spot is an ideal place for attracting the largest, most diverse group of people, because it's close to where people live. It's probably much easier to get to on public transport. But satellite sites, such as what Kindling Trust will be doing, sending their second and third year students off into a larger field scale growing operation, that has advantages, and I can see a parallel developing with that in Sheffield, where we will take what we can for the time being, and then as bigger spaces of land become available, we'll be able to expand the programme. So yeah, next slide please. So infrastructure, this is a great reason to join a FarmStart, apart from having land made available to you, is that most schemes give some form of shared infrastructure, and it does vary a lot. That could be tools, although some FarmStarters are expected to have their own tools, at least as they progress. It might involve machinery, but it usually involves access to water and electricity, which again are expenses that when you are trying to start your business, if you don't have to pay them, it's very useful. Kindling Trust, they have a flat fee for their course, and within that, seeds and other materials such as compost are actually provided. No infrastructure is provided by Organically, but they are primarily a land finding service and connecting people who are interested, who have done the FarmStart course, with new sites to work at. So their plots are free to rent, so they can't supply infrastructure. The McVean farm is an interesting again because it provides all the infrastructure on their test cropper course, which is a year-long course where everything is provided for you within the fee. But then effectively, as you apply to go to the startup farm phase, which is their final phase, you are weaned off this support, and they only supply you water in this phase. So effectively, it's still providing the land and the space and some mentorship, but it is effectively letting you loose as a farmer, as a new farmer, without giving you all that additional support. Next slide, please. So yeah, I've combined these slides together. So the training offered and also the entry requirements of, again, this varies quite a lot, and it's got to fit your local audience. And this is something that, you know, obviously one of the reasons I've gone so in depth into the case studies is I wanted to be able to explain to people that I'm approaching with my to be involved with the feasibility study actually what those models are, because I can't assume that, you know, they're going to know anything about it. So the Kindling Trust, they have levels 1, 2 and 3 of non-accredited training where people work alongside a professional grower 2 days a week. And of course, they provide additional learning in the form of classroom sessions, which includes, but it's not limited to, business skills, plot management, and developing routes to market. And this is something I feel is very useful. They hold sessions where the question is, do you want to be an organic farmer? And you actually have to have attended this session in order to be able to apply to be a farm starter. And I think that's a really good idea, because there has to be a vetting process. There has to be a filtering of people who just like growing, who fancy growing on a slightly bigger, larger piece of land, but have no real commercial ambition. So there has to be a way of trying to, you know, pull the people who are most appropriate to the scheme out of the number of applications they receive. Organically is an accredited trainer. They offer level 1 and 2 of City and Guilds horticulture courses. And in fact, the completion of a level 2 training is required before joining their 9-month FarmStart programme. So it's quite a different setup from Kindling Trust, and it works very well for them. Of course, you don't have to do the level 2 training there, but they provide it, and they provide it at a subsidised rate for those that can't afford to complete it. Next slide, please. At Tamar Grow Local, the interesting situation arose where they actually did originally have funding to deliver a growing skills programme, but there was limited take-up by the plot holders. And this is possibly because their emphasis was primarily on providing land in the first place, and perhaps more skilled growers were attracted, and perhaps they didn't feel they needed the training. However, sometimes what people think they need and what they actually need are sometimes different, so that didn't, you know, there were some issues with that. So they're in a position where they don't currently provide formal training, but they do offer advice on plot use, and they provide sessions with their business development manager. And they are now in the process of developing an offer of City and Guilds for their farm starters, which will be delivered via Organic Lease Framework. Importantly, this particular version of this qualification allows practical assessment of their existing farm plots rather than trying to set up something new and creating extra work for them. The McVean farm, yeah, it's quite different compared to all the other programs that I've looked at, in the sense that they offer a 5-hour course per week, which is described as being a test marketeer. And what this is the farm starter or potential farm starter has to demonstrate that they have understanding of the market or can develop that understanding of the market. And to pass this phase, you need to achieve £1,000 of sales of the produce from the farm. So effectively, they're getting people involved very early with the business side of things. And I imagine this is quite good, because by the end of that phase, a lot of people will realise that maybe they haven't got such you know, familiarity with the business and they need to do more, or perhaps it's just not for them and they'll drop out. So it's a good way of actually vetting people that go on to the next stage, which is a test cropper, where you spend a year working on a micro plot. which is very supported. And as I said already, they provide all the infrastructure for you to do that. So you just turn up, start growing effectively, and get training both collaboratively working alongside other people, but also other growers working there. So it's like a peer-to-peer model. After a minimum of a year as a test cropper, then you can transition to a startup farmer. But this is a big leap because you are actually expected to trade economically, having already built your own market. So there's possibly less support in route to markets in this model. There's much more of an emphasis on developing your own routes rather than relying on the existing trading networks. Next slide, please, Maddie. So yeah, a little bit on routes to markets. Something that I've noticed with all the UK case studies that I've looked at is that they all provide existing routes for produce, namely via veg boxes, local food hubs, selling directly into retail and restaurants and community kitchens. Something I picked up on earlier is if you want to demonstrate how a successful farm business works, you have to be a successful farm business. So without this strong relationship between the buyers and the people who are producing the food, it's very hard to actually demonstrate what a successful business looks like, and also explore the real life problems and real life solutions that you will learn by working with this stronger network.
Just 2 more minutes, Fran.
Okay, yeah, nearly there. So yeah, UK case studies that I've looked at also encourage the trading links outside existing networks. As suggested, they don't expect you to do this in your first year because it's very hard to be both learning how to grow, producing food at volume, building your business networks, trading networks. So it gives you a little breathing space where you can see how it all works, and then you're strongly encouraged to make your own path. Some cut that support off earlier than others, some continue to offer support. But the important thing is then they're allowing people's own capacity, their ingenuity to help build the market for and the supply of organic produce, which is of course what FarmStarts are all about. Next and last slide, please. So I just want to look at program costs, because something I'm very concerned about is that organic food does have a certain reputation to only be available to those that can afford it. Careers in organic food, careers in regenerative farming, we don't want to repeat those same mistakes. We want to make them open to everyone. So Organically has a model where the land is free, but they're not providing infrastructure. And I said before, the level 2 qualification is means tested, so you can actually study that for free. Obviously, there's limitations with that because that means you have to be really inventive on how you fund the infrastructure development on your site. But at least it's free to join the program. Tamar Grow Local, they have a sliding scale. They have in the first year it's £500 a year for a plot, a 1 acre plot. But this decreases. So after you've demonstrated your capacity and your continued commitment to the programme, after 3 years, this is decreased to £300 an acre with £150 deposit. And unfortunately, this deposit is there really to cover the fact that not everyone who's even vetted ends up completing the programme. And sometimes that means having to restore the land once somebody's left it, if they haven't left it in a particularly good condition. Kindling Trust has a flat fee of £600 a year, which includes materials. They also charge a £100 deposit. And the McVean Farm, well, that has the free test marketeer course, which is kind of a try before you buy. It's a way of dipping your toe in the water. But then the costs do go up. And obviously, this is a Canadian model, so the costs of this are perhaps relevant to the economy over there. So they might seem a little bit high unnecessarily over here. But the test cropper phase, which will last a minimum of a year, costs £870. And moving on from that is £1,100 a year to become a startup farmer, which may or may not be good value for money. I can't say at this stage because you are getting a larger amount of land for that. But these are costs which not everyone can afford. So it's really important to remember this when we're creating the pricing structure for this project, so as we can be as inclusive as possible. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Fran, for all of that in-depth detail about some of the case studies and what we've been going through. And I have to say that working with Fran on the FarmStart programme from Nottingham has also been really interesting, and she's been an inspiration as well, but we'll talk about that later. So I'm Bethan McIlroy, I'm from Nottingham. I'm part of the Nottingham Good Food Partnership. I've been working with Nottingham Organic Gardeners as a community grower for the past 10 years. And over the past year, I've become a market gardener for a restaurant. We've got links to a food share and the Nottingham Growing Network, which is NGN in the corner. So we've been focusing our feasibility study on the similar themes that Sheffield has done, as all of the FarmStarts have done, is demand, land, education and collaboration. So from our Nottingham perspective, let me show you what we've been doing. So of course, very similar to Sheffield and all of the cities across the country at the moment, we need to source more local crops. We have a huge procurement with the county council for schools, community groups and restaurants, of course, to lower our carbon footprint, have our circular economy and provide a variety and flavour. And the shocking thing that I've been discovering is our food bank demand in Nottingham was up more than 33% over last year. So there's a huge demand for good food. This is just a little map that I scraped from an old Nottingham, like local producers and distributors. And this is from 2017, just to give you a sort of like a map of our entire county. Nottingham's down the bottom. I won't get into why Nottingham's called Northern, you know, anything above Watford Gap is in the north, but that's beside the point. But if you can see Red Earth Organics, that was an organic veg box scheme that was around for 5 years, and the guy Philip, he moved to Germany and now grows in Cornwall. So one of our best organic veg boxes no longer exists, and so we don't have a lot of market gardeners in the city. But you can see the city's here. We've got a huge county, lots of land, lots of farming, but of course not very much of that is organic. It's mainly arable. And nothing in our county is agroforestry either. So we've been looking for land, and there are, as I've mentioned, local farms and some organic and some biodynamic. We've got lots of community groups in the city and county growing on allotments. There's no small, medium to large scale market gardens. We've got neighbourhood food, which is a sort of farmers market online where you do your click and collect, and our produce from that comes from Derbyshire rather than Nottingham. So it's still 20 miles away, but it's not in our county. So we did a post on Facebook about the Kindling Trust crowdfunding to raise money for their farm. And we were like, why don't we do this in Nottingham? Why don't we collaboratively buy a farm for our FarmStart? And we had a response almost immediately from a farm that none of us had ever heard about before. They're called Grange Farm. They're a 300-acre organic farm. They've been there for 20 years in Nottingham. They're 14 miles from the city, and they're really interested in hosting our FarmStart project. They're willing to give a 15-acre field to start off with for our farm starters, to split it into 1 to 5 acre plots, because they're really interested in diversification of their farm, regeneration. But they do have some rules and regulations that they want to specify, and they don't want their farm to be a petting zoo. They've got 98 dairy cows on a 300-acre farm. They have a lot of it at the moment left for pasture, and they're just, yeah, it's really exciting that they've come on board so quickly for the FarmStart project. We're also, it's one of those that as soon as you start talking to these farmers and building up these networks, that they're like, we've been wanting to do this for ages, we just don't have the funding or the time. So having a FarmStart and a project coordinator available to these people has been just eye-opening, because they're now talking about regenerative agriculture. They want to set up a community orchard. They want to grow their own trousers and have flax on some of their fields. They want to grow sugar beet for the bakery that wants to grow different molasses for sugar, and they want to grow interesting types of heritage wheat to then be able to put it on a canal, to then on a canal barge, so the wheat that they're growing in the field is directly transported on water to the inner city area where we've got our first urban mill that's been crowdfunded by Small Food Bakery. So already I have a huge list of to-dos and wants and wishes from Grange Farm that farm starters and enterprises could collaborate with. So we've been down to Wakelands down in Norfolk where they're doing enterprise stacking, and we're trying to learn from them what they've done to bring that collaborative approach back to Nottingham. And all of a sudden, I discovered that we have Woollerton Hall, which has a 4-acre walled garden in the city that's been taken over by a key group of motley volunteers, and they've been setting up their own allotment space there, and there's a potential that we can work with the City Council to have that as our urban centre hub where the farm starters can start on and then move on to the larger rural areas. So it's really exciting so far in Nottingham that things have moved so quickly. And as soon as people find out what you're doing, they want to connect you to the right people in the right places. So the next start for us really is finding our FarmStart applicants and other farms and land across the county, because we've pretty much just focused on the city centre and one borough being the closest to the city. Nottingham was in a similar position as Sheffield. I thought there was a lack of skilled horticultural farm workers that are setting up their own businesses, but both of our major universities offer agricultural courses, diplomas and horticultural degrees that cover commercial crop management. Of course, not necessarily with a focus on organic or agroforestry, but we do have the Nottingham School of Biosciences that is definitely working on more research with the soil and environment and nutritional science and plant and crop biology, both for aquaponics and looking at agroforestry as well. Our colleges offer horticultural courses, but they're not focused on food growing, but there's definitely recruitment routes for all of those options into our FarmStart programme. And I think, of course, our minimum entry requirements for FarmStart is definitely going on a similar course and workshop of, are you sure you want to go and be an organic farmer, and focus on food growing experience and the business incubation and not community gardening. So we're going to do the same as Sheffield. We're going to do the demand for land, because we've not done that in Nottingham, and create that land matching service. And I think it's been an eye-opener to encourage these farmers and landowners to consider options for working with new entrants. We always thought there'd be barriers to finding land, but actually as soon as you start to engage and the message gets out there, people are really interested, especially if you show that enterprise stacking model, they can bring a lot more money to their own farm. We've had a huge engagement from the County Council via the COVID Recovery Fund to start a mapping project to show what is already out there, what farms we have, linking that with community social growing spaces as well. And we've already had encouragement to link in with the health and wellbeing strategy and the Nottingham Food Charter. So we've been personally involved in writing that and helping with that development. So we're going to do a media launch with our local newspapers and direct sharing with all of our local groups. And just as a side note, we haven't mentioned the linking in with the community supported agriculture network. I think that's something that potentially we could look at as well, because that means for our FarmStart programme, if you've got a group of say 60 or 100 bed boxes and you're having that paid for model on a regular basis, it might become a little bit easier to manage. So this is the slide on looking forward, but I think we've had an updated notes on this. So I just wanted, who wants to touch on this? Does this want to be Maddie or Hattie? Because that's the end of my slide deck for Nottingham.
Thanks, Bethan, that's brilliant. Yes, I did have there is an updated slide. I'm not sure how to get it onto there, whether we can or can't. I don't know.
Just give me 1 minute. I'll unshare and share again.
Okay.
Someone like to do some hold music.
Are you moving into the Q&A now, or are you still finishing off one of the presentations?
Yeah, we just had a slide about the sort of looking forward, a bit about the next steps, but this is obviously not an exhaustive kind of list. Thank you, Bethan. Brilliant. Yeah, so sort of just wanted to start kind of putting down some of the things, the sort of 2022 view. But obviously this is a, as I said at the bottom bullet point, we are making the path as we walk it together and collectively. So we're kind of working it out as we go along as a group, and with the guidance of Landworkers Alliance and the other FarmStarts. I think there's a lot to be said for working in this sort of cluster of places model, doing it as an individual place, feeling sort of a bit like you're on your own, isn't nearly as much fun, I'm sure, and you haven't got the benefit of others' journey to walk alongside. So we've always thought about how we might continue the collaboration and this sort of cluster of places model and replicate it in other parts of the country. So potentially the Midlands or wherever the Urban Ag Consortium kind of focuses next. Yeah, just highlighting that we'll be looking for funding and applying kind of as a collective, as a regional collective. There'll be ongoing collaboration between the existing FarmStarts and these new FarmStarts, and the support from LWA and UAC and sharing resources. It'll be about developing resilient, viable models that are suited to place, as you've heard, and starting to make land work and farming a compelling, attractive kind of career choice with well-supported pathways. It's not something that we have ever had a kind of clear pathway for in this country, which is a bit strange. And obviously there's this sort of succession crisis, but it's this enormous opportunity for meaningful, physical, healthy, purposeful work in this country that is very much needed. Yeah, so I don't know if there's anything else that anyone else wanted to add to that. Otherwise, we can just go straight into questions. Maybe you can unshare for questions if you want, Bethan. And thanks for doing the slides. I know everyone thought that I was, but you were. I'll take all the credit.
Those were great presentations. Thank you. I think I've learned so much about FarmStart and how to set up new farming initiatives. I've been checking the chat. There's not a lot in terms of direct questions in the chat at the moment. So please raise your hand if you've got a question, and then I'll let you come live on the screen and ask your question to the speakers, please.
And also, if anyone's got their own experiences of this, I'm interested in kind of, you know, who you are and what you're interested in this is as well. So do share.
So Luke, you have your hand up.
Hey everyone, I'm Luke. I'm based in Sheffield, so I was very interested to hear about Fran's presentation in particular. I'm a new starter, been growing food on allotments for the past few years, and I'm really interested in getting into being a market gardener or organic grower. So the FarmStart scheme sound really great, but one of the things I've been interested to hear about is how you evaluate sites to be selected for FarmStarts or for like a farm growing project. Is there other things that you kind of like tick off in terms of, I don't know, road access, amenity? How do you evaluate that? And also, like, how do you aggregate all of that information into one place?
So yes, talking about the aggregation first, we were kind of relying, the food partnership was relying on some recent investigative research that's been done by an independent into the state of land holdings by Sheffield City Council at least, and that report hasn't landed yet. So we're still struggling for a sort of a whole view situation picture. one of the issues that we have is struggling to fund these activities. So things are hopefully changing because there is more money coming into the food partnership now. So that explains why we haven't got sort of a holistic view of the entire area. When it comes to actually assessing sites for their quality, gosh, there's so many different factors. So obviously, if you're talking horticulture, there's going to be the land grade issue to consider. So anything above what 3A would be okay for horticulture. Otherwise, you're talking about putting lots of difficulties in the way of people with, if it is less well graded than that, then I think that would be an issue. I think that aspect is very important. So again, we'd want to have a southwest or south facing field. That would be ideal if we could. Just speaking from personal experience, I grow in my own garden at nearly 200 metres up, and there's various things that just don't grow in Sheffield at 200 metres up. It's very exposed. So that might dictate not necessarily which piece of land we take, but the range of crops that could be grown on it. So there's different ways of approaching that, rather than saying absolutely no, because we can't grow everything on this land. I think you just have to accept that that's the land available, and you find a solution that's appropriate for that land. Transport is a major issue. So Regather Farm is 15 acres. It's actually not in Sheffield, it's in North East Derbyshire, it's just over the border. Can you get there on a bus? No, you can't. So, you know, it's a case of, if it was connected, better connected with the public transport network, that would be ideal. But again, we come back to the practical issue of where is the land? Where's the land that's already got a business model that we can learn from on it? And also, is there anybody there who actually wants to do the teaching, actually share their skills? Other factors to consider are issues of site security, whether it needs enhanced security, how much that might cost, what the soil quality is like, aside from just the grade of land. Is it been kept in good quality? What was the previous use? Was it used for cultivation? Has it had other purposes on it? In which case, if I was creating a hierarchy of what I'd prefer to work on, it would be land that's always been in cultivation, obviously. But again, we might not be able to be fussy. Kindling set up their current site at Woodbank on a ex-nursery and had to bring in lots of topsoil in order to be able to do that. So there's always solutions around that. And another thing as well to consider is water source, the basics. Have you got a stream on site? That'd be really nice. Have you got an underground aquifer that's available? How much will it cost to put that infrastructure in? So those are the things that immediately come to mind. But all of these are always, moderated by, you grow on what land is made available, really. But talking about, setting up a FarmStart with longevity, we want to have the best compromise between the land that's available and, practical uses for that land.
I'll just add a little bit to that, if I may, that the data of land is patchy, it's out of date, and it's unavailable. You have to pay a lot for it. It's soil data, for example, land classification is out of date, agricultural land classification. And just to say that the Urban Agriculture Consortium is convening a really interesting group of food land mappers, and that was started initiated really in Lancaster, based on the fact that they're, among other things, they are running a FarmStart and their graduates will need to move on, and where is the land that they can move on to? And so they've been doing this really interesting mapping project up there using a methodology called hope spots, layering up the available data and really sort of learning as they go along about what is knowable and what is unknowable at present, based on sort of gaps in data availability. But in that group as well, there's also somebody who is mapping all the neglected land in Newcastle, with a view to transforming it from neglected land into living soil. And so there's also something about what's the remediation that needs to be done, and how is that resourced as well. And often you can also take a patchwork farming approach, where you might have a cluster of smaller sites across an urban area that cooperate as one in some way and share infrastructure and so on, and they might have different strengths and different weaknesses in terms of their aspect or existing soil quality and so on. So yeah, a few different things to consider. And Claire, you're on mute.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that delay. I'm one of the directors of LESS, which is the sort of hosting or supporting organisation behind the Lancaster FarmStart. I can see Ellen's logged in, but I'm not sure if she's taking part in the questions. Oh, hi, Ellen. I was going to talk about what we had to do to get the 2 sites we've got, but you might like to do it for us. I was thinking of all the digging around that I did in the contaminated land register for one of our sites in the early stages.
Yeah, I mean, we did our feasibility study about 3.5 years ago, and yeah, what we found was, you know, there was demand for local food, there was demand for for people that wanted to do the training, and then it was the case of trying to piece together the funding and the land and things around that, and we found so we, a little bit similar to Beth, and it sounds like, yeah, so we, through the NFU mailing list, were able to find a local organic dairy farmer who has provided us with a site to rent, which is like a 1 acre site. And then we also had this collaboration with the council, which has provided us with a really large polytunnel, two width one. But yeah, obviously we had to do all the soil testing, and we had a land spec in terms of what we were looking for. And yeah, and then the 2 sites in their own right are both brilliant, but they're about 10 miles apart. So that's provided its own challenges in terms of sort of logistics around that. Yeah, do you want me to say a bit about where we're heading, Maddie? Yeah, so I guess for us, like, yeah, so we're 1 year in, we've just had our first growing season. We started off with 4 farm starters, and we had one person completed the program early, which is probably the right call for him. So we've been working on a model where not where people have their own separate piece of land, but where everyone kind of works towards the same goals on the same plot. So it's more like a sort of apprenticeship model. And everyone's been doing 2 days a week, with 1 day when everyone's together. And we had a more flexible sort of payment model. So either we could provide a bursary for people, or people could provide us with a fee if they were able to do that. So we tried to make sure that, yeah, if people weren't able to access it otherwise, we would be able to support them to do that. And then we've been selling via an open food network shop, which has been amazing, really easy to set up for farm gate pickup or collection at points in Lancaster, and then also to local retail and restaurants. But I guess for us, interestingly enough, we're being offered a lot of land, and there seems to be, as people found out about the project, we've been offered certainly 3 sites which seem like, you know, viable and feasible, and like they're quite likely to come off if we want them. And I guess for us it's more about building the demand and the market and the distribution mechanisms. So we need to kind of upscale, you know, even at the moment our grower is doing deliveries, you know, in a car, and as soon as we expand production, we're going to take on more land next year. We need to be able to get that distribution model working. So that's really our next step for us, probably looking at a city centre sort of distribution model, and really looking at then how we can work with other growers. So we've got people that want to move on to their own sites, but we feel like, you know, the Tamar model has a really well-developed market. So new growers can, you know, list their stuff and they're pretty much guaranteed that it's going to be able to be sold, and similar for organically. So for us, it's that piece that I think we really need to work on. And how do we make it easy for people locally to kind of make that choice to buy from us, and how can we do that collaboratively with the other local producers?
Brilliant. I'd be interested as well to hear from anybody else who's here, if you're in a place and where you would want there to be a FarmStart and there isn't, or what you're kind of, if you're a farm starter yourself, or yeah, if you need any particular kind of advice or support from anybody here. And also Sonia and Catherine, I don't know if you wanted to chip in. Yeah, Sonia.
Sure. Hi, I'm calling in from Leeds, and we're part of the Urban Agriculture Consortium, Northern Pathfinders, and we're in the early stages of doing our feasibility study. We're actually doing it in 2 stages, in that we've got some local producers who are doing an initial report on sort of available land and producers. And then we've just been notified that we've got a postgraduate researcher from the University of Leeds who will take on the next stage of the study. And what I think is quite interesting about the PGR is that they come from a right to food background. So I think that will be a really interesting part that I would like to incorporate into the study, that, while the FarmStart program is about, supporting the next generation of growers, but it's about really creating, supporting the food system for the city that ensures that everybody has access to this food. So I look forward to integrating that, and we'll update as we go along.
Hey, Catherine.
Yeah, I'm from FarmStart in Middlesbrough. We're also one of the Pathfinder locations. I've been working through the programme over the last 6 months, I think it is now. And I just wanted to pick up on one of the points that Maddie made about this kind of patchwork approach. We're a small, relatively small area. So everything's kind of a little bit scaled down compared to Sheffield and Nottingham. And we kind of started our feasibility study, but also started our FarmStart program at the same time as well. So we're kind of just jumped in with both feet. But this idea about patchwork location, because one of the things that's come back loud and strong, we've got plenty of people who would like to sign up to be farm starters, but they already have existing plots of land, and they don't want to move from those plots of land. And one of the things that's kind of come through loud and strong is that what they actually need is to support to make those plots of land commercially viable. So there is the possibility of them moving into larger spaces later, but at this early stage of our development, they're really looking to kind of find support and network to stay where they are, which is great. But one of the things I think is that's really coming to light, and just listening to other people's stories here, is that there's no kind of one size fits all at all with this project. There's our kind of FarmStart is very different to Nottingham's, to Sheffield, to Lancaster. They're all very different kind of setups, and there's a lot of flexibility within that, which is great. And it's really nice hearing these kind of, it's really nice hearing how things have moved on for other locations so successfully and so excitingly, but also to hear how different it is in these locations. And just for people who are kind of potentially thinking about this in other spaces, to kind of take heart from the fact that something, you do have to be kind of location specific, and something can be started with what you've got. That was a really long-winded way of saying that point. I hope that makes some sort of sense.
Yeah, it's I really like to hear how the different approaches, that's another amazing thing about working in this group way, is that we sort of really appreciate the diversity and the cultural diversity from place to place, the landscape diversity, the historical and heritage diversity, and the diversity of ourselves and the characters that we all are, and the way that we go about things, and we can really learn from each other. It's great. So in our last 5 minutes.
So Connor's just put a comment in the chat about keeping a network of cooperating growers with their own spaces are important for seed growing and seed saving, which is likely to become a new important element of our farm enterprises. So I'm part of the Gaia Foundation Seed Saving Network and Heritage Seed Library, and I'm definitely passionate about saving seeds and having that as one of our enterprises for FarmStart programme, because seeds are our future and we all know what's happening with that at the moment. So thank you, Connor. Are you seed saving yourself?
Yeah, I'm saving as part of a community saving initiative. I've been saving seeds for many years, but we've got a network.
Mute. I'm getting feedback, echoiness. Let's all mute ourselves, and then I might solve the problem. Try again, Connor.
Okay. Yeah. Is that any better?
No, there's two of you, but it's slightly less echoey.
Okay. But yeah, we're running a seed saving initiative across the north of Ireland, where we've got 16 social farms and community gardens saving and sharing their own seeds, which has been really successful.
Sorry to interrupt you, Connor. Would you be able to type that into the chat? Because I think people will find it easier to follow what you're saying if we do it that way. So really sorry to have muted you like that.
Can we just pick up on a question from Jasmine, who's asking about DEFRA's new entrance scheme? I think Hattie might be relatively well placed to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, so they're behind on their timeline. We were supposed to hear more details this October from them. The plan still is to roll something out next March, but yeah, when the sort of timeline slips, you have to wonder. So yeah, not exactly clear when that update from October will happen. Although we're keeping on kind of talking with them.
Just to say, we did, Steph, Hattie's predecessor, and I did have a meeting as well, specifically talking about this cluster and saying, hey, this is brilliant, we're doing this as a group, you want to fund us, don't you? So they're sort of aware of this grouping, and I've also just updated them about, you know, the fact that we're kind of coming towards the end of our feasibility study, and have they got any updates and things. So trying to keep the channel open there.
And I think that clustered approach, like you're saying, Maddie, just works so well, doesn't it, on a number of levels, in terms of sort of co-working and sharing learning and the excitement of it all, but also from a funding perspective, you know, we're stronger as a cluster, aren't we? So yeah. Just going back to that seed saving point, I don't know whether, have we heard what Connor was going to say? But yeah, I mean, not just, it sounds really basic, doesn't it? But cooperation in terms of sort of growing and selling produce within sort of regional networks, often it's lacking. And it just makes a whole lot more sense, doesn't it, to work in that kind of, yeah, collaboratively and together, not just in terms of seed saving, but actually what you're producing and thinking about need and demand in a kind of collective sense.
And that includes, you know, the existing farm starters who came to be teachers, that they really loved as well, like being able to share their knowledge directly with like the next wave of farm starts, and to be given an opportunity to reflect on what they're doing and kind of review it and go back and say, so how are we working, and what are our real strengths? And they really enjoyed that as well, so that it, you know, the network is this group sitting within that group and within, yeah.
Absolutely. And going forward, we'd like it to be the case that there is more support available, and a kind of like for people that are just interested in farm starts right the way through to those who are operational. But we recognise that, you know, on a national level, there's a lack of support for organisations and sites that are kind of thinking, oh, we'd love to start a farm start, but where, you know, how do you do that? And so, you know, got high hopes that part of that sort of DEFRA investment will be in kind of thinking about which organisations are going to support others and how to kind of really build the network in that way.
So Connor has come back. Thank you, Connor. I'll just read out what Connor has said so that everybody can hear that. So Connor's running a seed saving initiative across the north of Ireland, 16 to 20 community gardens and social farms, saving and sharing seeds, and working hopefully to become a stronger group, the Seed It Union. So perhaps, Connor, if you've got a link for the Seed It Union, you could put that in the chat as well. That'd be great. Maddie, I'd also point out that you've got a minute left.
Yes, so there's another message from Catherine, and Jasmine's got her hand up, but I think we get booted out, don't we, when the time cuts off. So is Jasmine just...
Did you want to round up and then I can stop?
Yeah, just thank you everybody for coming, and I put my email in the chat. If you want to get in touch with any of us, just email me and I can put you in touch. And yeah, thanks to the whole group and everyone who's made this all happen. And thanks to the Northern Rural Farming Conference for having an amazing conference. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.